Black Ops 6 just came out and I just finished the story mode, and I'm glad to say that this campaign is probably the best Call of Duty campaign in years. So, I'm one of the very few people who buy Call of Duty games just for their campaigns. Mostly because I grew up in a time back when Call of Duty had story modes that were so good, they still have an impact on games today. But in recent years, with the release of Modern Warfare 3 and Vanguard, the campaigns have been mostly disappointing. There have been a few exceptions like Modern Warfare and Cold War, but for the most part, a majority of Call of Duty games have had bad or just okay story modes, but Black Ops 6 might have just changed things. Now, in terms of story, the campaign is probably awful, but in terms of gameplay and missions, the game is great. So many of the missions feel unique and fun, and have so much depth to them. It makes you forget you're even playing a Call of Duty game. In one of the missions, you're trapped inside a compound and have to take on a bunch of zombies and several bosses, and each boss has a unique spin that makes it really fun, and the mission feels like something you would see in Resident Evil, so it's really interesting to have this here, and it's probably my favorite mission out of any Call of Duty game. There are also a couple of missions like the KGB headquarters mission you play in Cold War, and they're not as good as that mission, but I still had a lot of fun with them, and I hope they keep making missions like these because they're starting to become the best part of Black Ops games. The only problem I had was that the AI during stealth were pretty dumb, but other than that, they're still great missions. The only mission in the campaign that I didn't like was the hunting season mission. It just felt boring and time-consuming because of how big the map was and how long it took to drive to each location. I kind of wish they had cut it out, but other than that, most of the missions are great. I also really enjoyed the missions, and the music here is probably my favorite out of any Black Ops game. I also loved how some of the missions felt like I was playing a Resident Evil game. I just can't say enough about how much I enjoyed this story mode. But the only thing about the campaign that really holds it back is the story. It's extremely predictable, and I would generally be shocked if anyone was surprised about the person who turns out to be the traitor because it's literally the most obvious person. The whole silent protagonist thing has overstayed its welcome in Call of Duty games and video games as a whole. It makes dialogue feel a lot more boring and generic when you have a character who can only speak when you have a text option, because they didn't give your character a face. He doesn't show up in any cutscenes besides his legs and lower body, and that makes you feel like your character doesn't really matter in this story. He isn't even the main character in this because Marshall is, and it's really hard to connect with Marshall because you only play as him once for a couple of minutes. It's also kind of hard to connect with the main villain here because we barely know or see the main villain for most of the story, but yet it tries to get you to emotionally connect to them, even though I couldn't care less about them. I think the story they wanted to do could have worked a lot better if the main guy you played as was Marshall. And if they would have built up to this in the last Black Ops game, but they decided to rush things and to use a silent protagonist, even though that doesn't work in a game like this. Even though the story is lackluster, I still think the gameplay is good enough to make this one of the better Call of Duty campaigns. Whether you like Call of Duty games or not, I think you'll enjoy this story mode regardless just because of how good the gameplay is. There's great music, missions, boss fights, and basically just everything any gamer would love when it comes to gameplay. So, in my opinion, you should give the Black Ops 6 story mode a chance. But what do you think? Comment down below your thoughts on this and if you are going to play this. And don't forget to like and subscribe because I will be reviewing the Zombies mode next. But for now, thanks for watching.